Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Rudy Giuliani and a number of the president's other lawyers held a press conference today on the topic of voter fraud. If you didn't actually see it, you've probably heard about it by now. Giuliani, along with a former federal prosecutor called Sidney Powell and a number of others, alleged that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. To demonstrate that, they exhibited some of what they found after 2 weeks of investigating. The presentation went on for 90 minutes with many different threads, which we'll tell you about in a moment. How you viewed it depended largely on who you voted for. Trump voters seemed hopeful that it might change the election results. The left, and virtually every single person in all of the news media, immediately dismissed it as an embarrassing clown show as well as a threat to the republic. The very same people who swore that Vladimir Putin's agents controlled the U.S. government called it a conspiracy theory. Of course they did, and we'll have more on that in a minute. But first and more important, there is another way to look at what we saw this afternoon, and you don't have to be a partisan or even interested in the election to understand it. A lot of Americans believe this election was rigged. They're not saying that because they're crazy. They're not just saying it because they're mad. They mean it. And that's a potentially fatal problem for this country. Elections aren't merely, quote, central to democracy. Elections are democracy. Voting is the way the public expresses its will. It's all people have. If elections don't work, our entire system doesn't work. Everything in this country depends on fair elections. And it's obvious even now that we don't have them. When access to basic information is restricted and weaponized by a partisan billionaire class, and it is, you can't have a fair election. By definition, it is not possible. Google and Facebook are far greater threats to our system than Russia has ever been, and we need to fix that immediately. In the meantime, though, the voting itself, which was the topic of today's press conference, let's assess what the president's lawyers said about it today. Their allegations matter regardless of what the eventual outcome is. Rudy Giuliani began by saying the Democrats stole the election, and they did it with a coordinated fraud in a number of states. Giuliani did not conclusively prove that, as every newsreader on television promptly informed you. But he did raise legitimate questions, and in some cases he pointed to what appeared to be real wrongdoing. At one point, Giuliani held up an affidavit from a worker from the city of Detroit called Jesse Jacob. The affidavit alleges fraud in Detroit's polling places. Here's part of Giuliani's explanation.
She was assigned to voting duties in September, and she was trained by the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. She was basically trained to cheat. She said that I was instructed by my supervisor to adjust the mailing date of these absentee ballot packages to be dated earlier than when they were actually sent in. The supervisor made that announcement for all workers to engage in that fraudulent practice. That's not me saying that. That's this American citizen saying that under oath.
The city of Detroit has denied that specific allegation, surprisingly or not. But what Rudy Giuliani said is correct. This is the sworn statement of an American citizen, apparently an eyewitness to it, made under oath under the penalty of perjury. So you cannot dismiss it out of hand. Jacob goes on to say that her supervisor told her not to check the photo IDs of voters when they arrived. She says she saw city employees coaching voters on who to vote for, as well as voters voting more than once. Is any of that provable? Is it true? Well, we should find out, and not because Michigan is a swing state. Voter fraud is a direct attack on our democracy. But the media don't want to know. They're not interested. If you watch the coverage after the press conference today, you saw credentialed reporters, some of whom we know and like, actually, refuse even to acknowledge it. No mention whatsoever of the contents of what they described as, quote, what he says are sworn affidavits. What he says? Well, why don't you check? Giuliani says that this affidavit from Detroit has been made public, but they can't be bothered to check. Instead, they launch into editorials about how dishonest and crazy Rudy Giuliani is, as if their job was to rebut Rudy Giuliani. But that's not their job. Their job is to explain what just happened, preferably with some detail so that viewers at home can make up their minds. They didn't do that. Behavior like this does not help anyone. It diminishes the news media's tiny remaining reserve of credibility. It certainly doesn't inform the public. On some channels, of course, informing the public is last on the list of concerns. Watch one of the most reckless people on television go back to the Putin well and accuse Giuliani, yet again, of being a puppet of Russia.
Quick reminder, Rudy Giuliani, now at the helm of Donald Trump's election delegitimization effort, was singled out by U.S. intelligence agencies last year as the target of a likely Russian disinformation effort. And earlier today, he held a wild news conference filled with falsehoods on voter fraud.
Russian disinformation. Sometimes you wonder if there's anything the Democrats don't like in America, from acid reflux to termite damage, that they won't blame on Russia. At some point, maybe 5 years from now, when we all wake up from this stupor, a lot of people are going to be deeply embarrassed by tape like that, so be sure to save it. In fact, there was nothing Russian about a lot of what Giuliani said today. He claimed that voters in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh were allowed to change their ballots after the fact, cure the ballots, as it's known, by the Democratic Secretary of State, and Republican counties were not. That's checkable. He said dozens of Republican voting inspectors in Pennsylvania weren't allowed near mail-in ballots and have signed affidavits saying so. That's another concrete, checkable claim. Giuliani said that mail-in votes are easier to falsify and harder to verify than traditional voting is. That's clearly true. Everyone knows it's true, and it's a major problem. Pretending otherwise is a lie. And then Giuliani got to the way votes are counted. In this country, the process is mostly electronic. Giuliani suggested that electronic vote counting is an invitation to fraud. And he's right. That's why Canada, for example, doesn't do it. All of which brings us to the bombshell at the center of today's press conference. That was delivered by former prosecutor Sidney Powell, who has also served as General Mike Flynn's lawyer. For more than a week, Powell has been all over conservative media with the following story. This election was stolen by a collection of international leftists who manipulated vote tabulating software in order to flip millions of votes from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. The other day on television, Powell said of Trump that when the fraud is finally uncovered, quote, "I think we'll find he had at least 80 million votes." In other words, rigged software stole about 7 million votes in this election. Here's some of what Powell said today about the software.
One of its most characteristic features is its ability to flip votes. It can set and run an algorithm that probably ran all over the country to take a certain percentage of votes from President Trump and flip them to President Biden, which we might never have uncovered had the votes for President Trump not been so overwhelming in so many of these states that it broke the algorithm that had been plugged into the system. And that's what caused them to have to shut down in the states they shut down in.
That was a few hours ago, but Sidney Powell has been saying similar things for days. On Sunday night, we texted her after watching one of her segments. What Powell was describing would amount to the single greatest crime in American history. Millions of votes stolen in a day. Democracy destroyed. The end of our centuries-old system of self-government. Not a small thing. Now, to be perfectly clear, we did not dismiss any of it. We don't dismiss anything anymore, particularly when it's related to technology. We've talked to too many Silicon Valley whistleblowers. We've seen too much. After 4 years, this may be the single most open-minded show on television. We literally do UFO segments. Not because we're crazy or had even been interested in the subject, but because there is evidence that UFOs are real and everyone lies about it. There's evidence that a lot of things that responsible people used to dismiss out of hand as ridiculous are in fact real. And we don't care who mocks it. The louder the Yale Political Science Department and the staff of the Atlantic magazine scream, "conspiracy theory," the more interested we tend to be. That's usually a sign you're over the target. A lot of people with impressive-sounding credentials in this country are frauds. They have no idea what they're doing. They're children posing as authorities, and when they're caught, they lie, and then they blame you for it. We see that every day. It's the central theme of this show, and will continue to be. So that's a long way of saying we took Sidney Powell seriously. We had no intention of fighting with her. We've always respected her work. We simply wanted to see the details. How could you not want to see them? So we invited Sidney Powell on the show. We would have given her the whole hour. We would have given her the entire week, actually, and listened quietly the whole time at rapt attention. That's a big story. But she never sent us any evidence, despite a lot of requests, polite requests, not a page. When we kept pressing, she got angry and told us to stop contacting her. When we checked with others around the Trump campaign, people in positions of authority, they told us Powell has never given them any evidence either, nor did she provide any today at the press conference. Powell did say that electronic voting is dangerous, and she's right. We're with her there. But she never demonstrated that a single actual vote was moved illegitimately by software from one candidate to another. Not one. So why are we telling you this? We're telling you this because it's true. And in the end, that's all that matters, the truth. It's our only hope. It's our best defense. And it's how we're different from them. We care what's true, and we know you care too. That's why we told you. Maybe Sidney Powell will come forward soon with details on exactly how this happened and precisely who did it. Maybe she will. We are certainly hopeful that she will. What happened with the vote counting this month, and at the polling places in Detroit, and the polling places in Philadelphia, and so much else, actually matters. It matters no matter who you voted for. It matters whether or not you think this election is already over. Until we know the answers to those questions conclusively and we can agree on them, this country will not be united.